Hey, what's up everybody? In this video, I'm going to show some techniques on helping you take a action pose and map that onto a character with a different body shape. And the way we're going to start off by this is, this reference photo is from Noah Bradley, and I'm going to go ahead and start off by indicating the line of action. That's basically a simplified version of the reference's spine. And then I'm going to now think about like what the tilt is. I'm just going to establish some lines here to indicate where the pelvis tilts, where the shoulders tilt, to give me a point of reference for hanging the arms and the legs off of the model. So in this particular case, we can see that the cylinders that represent this area right here, the shoulder area, are going to look something like this. And then we can see that the pelvis is going to be just a little bit wider. It's going to be something like this. So we have a simplification of the twist that this model is currently exhibiting. So let's go ahead now and consider pinch. And then we have stretch. And just for the sake of argument, we're just going to simplify this. My goal here is not to draw the reference exactly, but to use the reference as an informative tool to help me create a dynamic pose. We have the neck. And we have the shoulder blades. And this is a cylinder that is foreshortened. Let me just tilt that up a little bit. And her lower arm is coming out towards us. And I'll just get rid of this so it makes it a little bit clearer. When you're drawing a person's head, and when that person has hair, you want to visualize the structure of the skull and not get lost with the just drawing the hair. So I always start off by drawing the head, imagining the hair doesn't even exist. You can see that the skull ends somewhere over here. And then I'm going to use a simplified set of trapezoids. You can see that this finger is coming in. There is trapezoid 1. We have an additional finger. And we have the thumb. We have another trapezoid over here. And the angles are really important. I'm trying to match those angles. And we have another simplified trapezoidal shape right here with a hint of a thumb. I'll scale this down a little bit so I have a little bit more room to draw. Now let's consider the cylinder that represents the leg that's closest to the viewer. And why am I using cylinders here? Because if I were to map clothing onto this model, then I have an idea of how the clothes will hang and fall over the figure. Extend the legs here. We see a hint of the other leg. I'm going to draw through the form. Give myself a little bit of a gap for the knees. There's a little bit of an angle here that's happening between the distance on both feet. So this is the basic pose that I've extracted from my reference. And it's at this point that I can go ahead and check my proportions. I can, verify that I've captured the appropriate angles for both the arms and the feet, and make whatever tweaks that I need to make. From this point, I can, if I want to exaggerate this pose, which I think I'm going to go ahead and do, what I want to do is I want to emphasize a little bit more of the tilt. So she's kind of punching, and I've already done some exaggeration on her spine here, but I want to push that. I want to make this a little bit more of an aggressive punch. So I'll drop the opacity on this layer just to go ahead and demonstrate what I'm talking about. So I'm going to add a little bit more forward tilt to the spine, and I'm going to keep the shoulder blades and the pelvis structures in the same orientation. So if I move this over, you can see by adding that extra push to the spine, we're getting a little bit more of an aggressive stance on the body. We still have our pinch, we have our stretch, we have the area where the neck comes out. I can move that neck forward a little bit just to give it a little bit more aggression. And I can keep the limbs in their general locations here. So we have this shoulder blade, and we're going to compress the arms. And what I'll also do is I'll take a moment to bend the subject's knees a little bit more. So instead of the pose being more upright, I'm going to exaggerate it by adding a little bit more of an angle to the thigh. When you bend the knees, you create more tension. And tension makes something more exciting and implies movement. So already you can see, if I just scale this reference down, add a little bit of tilt there. So I'm going for a more stylized interpretation of this pose. I'm not drawing the pose exactly. That's not the purpose of this video. The purpose is, if you have a reference and you want to find a way to make it look more dynamic, you have to rely on exaggeration. And so now I've got a much more aggressive punch. And of course, I can take that and I can add even more exaggerations. Let's turn off the initial pose here for a moment. Move this off to the side and add a little bit more tilt, keeping the same general angle. So now I'm almost taking it into a cartoony territory. Let's move this up. And so you might say, well, you're changing the pose. You're absolutely right, I am changing the pose. We still have our pinch. We still have our stretch. And this time I'm going to lower the neck even more. Let's add that upper arm tilt. And this is not, I'm not adding any detail or anything of that nature. I'm simply capturing the pose and exaggerating that pose to get something that looks more dynamic. So if we look at the different passes that I've made here, we can see a progression. I'll just toggle the visibility of this. And you can see the more exaggerated I get with the drawing, the less stiff it is. It actually feels like it has some implied movement. So the thesis of this particular video here is, okay, we've established these basic proportions for the figure that I'm looking at here, but what if I wanted to now take this exaggerated punch and map that onto, say, a more heavy-set character, right? So let's toggle the visibility of the other two references. We'll move this up. And the way I'm going to approach this is I'm going to continue to keep the line of action, but this time I'm going to make the pelvis much wider, because the girth of a heavyset character is going to emphasize the pelvis, right? And then by contrast, I'll make the shoulder blade area smaller. We'll still have our pinch and stretch. We'll still have the character's head. And all the other elements here, I guess we're dealing with a more heavyset character, so we're going to have arms that are going to be a little bit thicker. And I'm just moving this arm out just to improve the readability of the silhouette here. Always draw through your form. So we still have that angle maintained. Now we've got a much more heavyset character that has been mapped from our reference study here. And I can always go back through and finish this out. I can also take this and apply this to, say, more of a male anatomy as well. Now I know that the structures that I've created here don't imply male or female. They're just basically breaking down the pose, right? It's dissecting the pose, and this could be applied universally. So I'll just show you how we can apply this to maybe more of a superhero male pose. So we can, and this time what I'll do is I'm going to change this up a little bit. I'm going to make the pose maybe less aggressive by tilting the line of action backward. Okay, so that's the big difference here. But I'll still keep the position of the shoulder blades and the pelvis. And there's a superhero character, so we'll just make the pelvis just a little bit tinier. We still have that pinch. We still have the stretch. Maybe what we'll do is we'll tilt the head back. I need to shrink this down a little bit so I have more room to draw. So now I've just changed the attitude of that pose. Instead of a more aggressive pose, I'm having the character lean back. So these are some really important techniques that I use when I'm deconstructing a reference and trying to exaggerate it. I find it to be very helpful, and it can also help me when I'm having to map a specific reference to a different body type. What you want to remember is that you want to first establish the line of action, then you want to establish the placement of what I call the shoulders and the pelvis, because those are going to dictate where your arms and your legs are going to attach to. And then from there, the proportions of those cylinders will dictate the body type. You make the pelvis bigger, much bigger than the shoulders, then you imply a heavyset character. You make the shoulder blades much bigger than the pelvis, then you imply a more athletic character. And there's a whole range in between. And you can even map it to a character that might be either shorter or taller, right? Let's just do that as one more example here. So if I want to map this to a shorter character, then what I can do is I can just move, have a much smaller line of action. We're still going to have our pinch. We're still going to have our stretch. Maybe we'll make the character's head a bit bigger. And nowhere am I getting into any kind of detail at this stage. I don't really care about detail. That will work itself out when I get to that point. But for right now, it's about capturing the pose, why am I always drawing this line here? Just to imply that there is a foot that is closer to the viewer and a foot that's much further away. And that's why I'm doing that. So now I've got this mapped onto a shorter squat character. So I hope you found this to be useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Drawing action poses can be a lot of fun. And I look forward to hearing what your feedback is. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.